Into the world. And always just sit up there releasing a book.
I didn't do anything.
All right. Okay.
It's like she said it's
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for your patience. As some of my students know, I am not the best at technology, so I regret that has impacted things. But good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I want to extend a very warm welcome to students, to faculty, to alum, friends, and family, as well as our dean, who I think is here, I hope.
Set the alarm for when?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sure why my watch is doing that. Whom I hope you will meet in a bit, but I really want to welcome you to the 19th Annual History of Art and Architecture Student Symposium. I'm Joanna Gardner-Huggett. I'm an associate professor of art history, and I've had the privilege to teach the senior capstone being celebrated today. On behalf of HAA, I want to sincerely thank all of our wonderful students who are presenting this evening, as well as the faculty who made this possible by supporting students in symposium rehearsals and helping them polish their papers for this event. Much appreciation goes to Dr. Yunshen Liu and Professor Cheryl Bashand for their work on the symposium committee. Unfortunately, Dr. Liu cannot be here, but I'm grateful to her for designing the lovely symposium program. I also want to thank Dr. Delancey, who's ever patient with me as well, our great chair, for assisting me at many points while putting the symposium together. Before we start our presentations, I'd like to introduce our noted alumna, Jenna Washington, who's sitting here right in the front. And you'll meet her soon. Jenna Washington holds a bachelor's degree in the history of art and architecture with a minor in environmental studies from DePaul. Her thesis centered on contemporary West African architecture to examine responses of colonialism and its influences on climate change. Most recently, Jenna was appointed registrar and archivist of apparatus projects, a professional work, a 501c3 artist-directed space founded and run by DePaul alumni. Washington began her professional work experience in arts education at the Hyde Park Arts Center and later at the Studio Museum in Harlem. She is currently the sales coordinator in Marianne Ibrahim, an art gallery highlighting artists of the African diaspora, and is enrolled in Dominican University's Master's in Library Information Sciences program. Special thanks extended to Jenna for serving as a moderator for the symposium and spending time in conversation with our students this week. So please give our students and Jenna a warm welcome this evening. In terms of format, I hope you have a program left at the end of each row, and we will have 2 panels of 5. Jenna will kindly come up and have a discussion with the students. And I ask that, given this, the tight time frame we have this evening, that you ask individual questions during the break or during the reception at the end of the symposium. But now I'd like to welcome Dr. Kurt Hansman to present, or to introduce our first speakers.
The first speaker this evening is Lily Horner. Her paper entitled Light, Death, and Consciousness, Heart Amulets in the Amarna Period and Beyond was written for Professor Catherine Zaribida's Introduction to European Art.
14th century BCE, during the late 18th dynasty of Egypt's New Kingdom, Amenhotep IV, soon renamed Akhenaten and observed here in this stelae, took power, completely overthrowing traditional Egyptian theology and moving the capital from ancient Thebes to modern-day Tel El Amarna and establishing there the new capital of Akhet-Aten. As the name of Pharaoh and his new city would imply, Akhenaten's doctrine positioned the sun disk Aten, source of light and life before all prior gods. What made Akhenaten's new theology particularly radical was its recharacterization of the relationship between divine, pharaoh, and subjects. Aten was entirely inaccessible to the average person, portrayed exclusively as a sun disk rather than the humanoid or zoomorphic representations of earlier deities, as observed here. Aten instead required an intermediary, Akhenaten, between worshipper and the divine. Only Akhenaten could know what was in the Aten's heart, and thus faith in the Aten was necessarily expressed as loyalty to Pharaoh. Among the many examples of artwork produced under the reign of the so-called heathen king, a characteristic amuletic form sticks out. A heart, in the form of a jug, made of glass and further decorated with clustered lines or trailed threads. Such amulets are typically dated to the 18th dynasty at large, but a handful from the Art Institute of Chicago are specifically dated to around 1350 BCE, just a few years away from the Amarna period's beginnings. Indeed, further archaeological work concerning the tombs of Amarna repeatedly describes the appearance of heart amulets, and the industries of glassworking and glassmaking necessary for the fabrication of such amulets were established at Amarna by Akhenaten. The presence of such amulets, alongside the heart amulet's significant role in Egyptian funerary practice and its ties to pharaonic authority, speak to the importance of the heart amulet in understanding the social, religious, and artistic shifts that occurred leading up to, during, and in the aftermath of the Amarna period. To begin with, the heart was the most essential of the organs to the ancient Egyptians, occupying a role much more in line with our modern conception of the brain or the soul. Thought to be the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory, the heart was alone among the bodily organs and remaining in the body during and after mummification. The heart retained the memory of the deceased's life and actions before death, and thus it was weighed on the scales to determine if one was worthy of eternal life. Amulets were of similar importance to the funerary practice of ancient Egypt, often made explicitly to be left among the wrappings of the deceased. Heart amulets being, at their core, three-dimensional rendings of the Ib hieroglyph, observed here, and which literally meant heart, thus having a meaning tightly interwoven with the significance of the heart itself. The heart amulet represented the regeneration and renewal promised in the ancient Egyptian afterlife, entry into which was gated behind one's actions in life as remembered and testified to by one's heart. As heart amulets appear in the 18th dynasty, so too do the earliest artistic depictions of them. These representations associate the heart amulet with Theban royalty and loyalty to Pharaoh. Artistic depictions of heart amulets disappear in the reign of Akhenaten, but not the amulets themselves. A large corpus of amuletic forms is found at Amarna, among them images of traditional deities including Bes, Hathor, Taweret, scarabs, eyes of Horus, and representations of animals, hieroglyphics, and body parts, undoubtedly including the heart. Heart amulets are thus part of a larger collection of amuletic forms that express a noticeable level of diversion from Amarna doctrine as written. By contrast, the established connection between the heart amulets and pharaonic authority served the theology of the Aten. Being associated with Akhenaten's uniquely illuminated conscience as it related to his special relationship to the Aten, heart amulets acted as a visual signifier of both his superior connection to the divine and the necessity of the pharaoh for the average worshipper to reap the benefits of their faith. Regardless, the heart amulet still retained its ultimate and most crucial significance in funerary belief. Under Atenism, the sunlight of the Aten was the sole source of life. The afterlife was thus conceived of as a place of absence, empty and without this life-giving light. However, much of the archaeological evidence at Amarna points to subversion of this feature of doctrine as well. The aforementioned frequent appearance of various amuletic forms indicates a level of veneration of traditional deities. At Amarna, we also find traditional shrines, small figurines and stelae, and even a prayer to Amun, collectively demonstrating the event that even in the heartland of Akhenaten's Egypt, Atenism was not nearly as absolute as it seemed. Heart amulets serve as exemplars of both larger traditions altogether discarded by Amarna doctrine, and also the reinterpretation of existing symbols under the new religious and political climate, and, in this contradiction, the complexity of the lived experience under Akhenaten's reign. Though deeply tied to funerary beliefs that became incompatible with Atenism, the material presence of heart amulets at Amarna, alongside amuletic forms that more obviously deviated from state doctrine, is evidence that the heart amulet continued to be used, either through reinterpretation of its form to fit the new belief system, or, as seems to be the case among those outside of Pharaoh's circle, plain deviation from Atenist practice. Given the previously discussed significance of the heart in Egypt, it is altogether logical for an amuletic representation of such an important organ to survive Akhenaten's upheaval and, as we shall see, maintain a noticeable presence in its aftermath. A deep concern for personal piety, expressed in the Amarna period as loyalty to Pharaoh, only intensified under the successive Ramessid period. Furthermore, a concentrated focus on the afterlife and a broader concern for mortuary ritual pervades material evidence in the post-Amarna decades. Tomb decoration and furnishing in the Ramessid period are dominated by specifically mortuary objects, whereas the everyday items and concerns frequently seen in Amarna period tombs are much less present. The already elaborate process of mummification intensified in complexity and care, and it is from this period that the documentation defining our concept of Egyptian mummification derives. Heart amulets, for their part, reappear in artistic representations, now almost entirely defined by their funerary associations. The heart amulet appears in scenes relating to funerary ritual or in afterlife vignettes. As personal piety became more desired and the traditions of the afterlife returned and were elaborated upon, the heart's significant position in Egyptian belief would have only intensified. After all, a pious life meant nothing without a heart to testify to one's deeds. Thus, in the post-Amarna and later Ramessid periods, the heart amulet reacted to and facilitated a return to religious tradition, increasing in significance with the Ramessid period's demonstrated attention to funerary ritual and its furnishings. The heart amulet's funerary function and meaning ultimately occupies a level of primacy that cannot be ignored in the discussion of these objects, unchanged as it seems to have been during decades so defined by disturbance and upheaval. Despite the shift away from the afterlife and indeed its eradication under Atenist doctrine, heart amulets dating to the late 18th dynasty are not uncommon and make themselves materially present in the tombs of Akhenaten. Under Amarna theology, heart amulets in part serve as emblems of pharaonic power, useful to a ruler whose status as pharaoh was so tightly intertwined to his uniquely illuminated conscience, and thus his mind and heart. They stubbornly maintained their mortuary role as well, one of a collection of indicators that Amarna doctrine was not so strictly followed nor enforced, even at the center of Akhenaten's Egypt. After Akhenaten's death and the swift reinstatement of old gods and traditions, a lingering concern for piety and intensification of mortuary ritual meant heart amulets maintained or even heightened their significance. Ultimately, in examining the heart amulet's position during the Amarna period, its aftermath, and in the decades that followed, we are able to identify not only how the function and understanding of the heart amulet shifted throughout the years, but also gain insight into larger trends and shifts that occurred as the doctrine of the Aten came and went.
The next paper is by Christian Braun, Egypt to Rome, the Versatility and Transformation of the Obelisk, written for Dr. Mahoney's Art and Power in Pagan and Early Christian Rome.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. So, an obelisk is defined as a singular quadrangular upright stone having its four faces inclined towards each other, and in section, all its angles are right angles, and all its sides are parallel to each other. The obelisk was born in Egypt and has existed since the Old Kingdom, circa 2600 BCE. In Egypt, the obelisk served as a dedicatory object to the sun god Ra, and as a testament to the king who commissioned the obelisk. As the Roman Empire grows, they become more obsessed with power and spolia, which essentially means looted and repurposed objects. And Rome continuously robbed objects, including obelisks, from occupied Egypt since 10 BCE, to the extent where Rome ends up with 14 of the 35 ancient obelisks remaining worldwide. To examine this phenomenon, I turn to many different obelisks, such as the Montecitorio and the Pompeii obelisk. These obelisks were commissioned by Egyptian ruler Psammetichus II and erected around 640 BCE. Obelisks in Egypt were displayed outside burial places and dedicatory temples in pairs, depicting hieroglyphic inscriptions reflecting the patronage of the pharaoh. Fueling his campaign for political unity between Upper and Lower Egypt, Semitic II focused on introducing arts and language into the public realm in order to strengthen his legitimacy. Through the obelisk, the pharaoh evokes his predecessors and solidifies his claim to the throne as rightful ruler who is closest to the gods. As Egypt evolves under the Ptolemaic dynasty, Rome begins to take notice of Egypt. After Caesar's death, Augustus defeats Cleopatra and Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Augustus becomes emperor of Rome and Egypt becomes a province under the Roman Empire. With this newfound power, Augustus participates in the Roman tradition of collecting spolia and decides to transport 2 obelisks from Egypt to Rome in 10 BCE, nearly 20 years after his victory. The lengthy process of transporting the obelisks from Egypt to Rome is important as the obelisk transitions from an Egyptian icon to a Roman one. With obelisks standing over 100 feet tall and weighing thousands of pounds, it was often required that custom ships be built to transport the obelisks across the sea to Rome in a single piece. This act of spoliation strengthens the Roman public's idea that the empire is thriving through military triumph while keeping the public's trust in their current leader, Augustus. The Montecitorio obelisk arrives in Rome in 10 BCE under Augustus and is erected in the Campus Martius, which was an important public space dedicated to various athletic and military activity. Once in Rome and in the Campus Martius, the obelisk absorbs the context of military triumph and imperialism surrounding it, becoming iconic to Roman citizens. Additionally, we see subsequent Roman emperors, such as Claudius, Domitian, and Theodosius, play upon the imagery depicted by the obelisk, recalling the golden age of Rome under Augustan rule. The obelisk now specifically represents Augustus's conquest and his defeat of Egypt, which is recorded by an important Roman author and historian, Pliny the Elder. Pliny described that the obelisk is representative of competition between kings as well as a symbol of imperial undertaking. Pliny also establishes that the obelisk is officially adopted as a Roman object when Rome begins to produce their own obelisks with Egyptian hieroglyphs. With this, the original knowledge of the obelisk's history, function, and intent is still necessary for the transformation and appropriation of the obelisk to represent Roman imperialism. Carrying over its functions from Egypt, the obelisk continues to represent dedications to the sun god in Rome. The dedication relies on specialized knowledge of the Egyptian obelisk as well as citizens' recognition of the object as related to the sun. This sun imagery is strengthened by the function of the Montecitorio obelisk in the Campus Martius as a gnomon for a sundial, and physically representing time and space in relationship to the sun. Additionally, the obelisk sported a new Roman base with Latin inscriptions dedicating the obelisk to Sol, the Roman sun god. These spiritual associations of time define the Roman obelisk alongside its identity of spolia. Eventually, the obelisk in Rome develops a completely new function as the Flaminio obelisk is relocated to the Circus Maximus in 10 BCE. Alongside other public displays of spolia, the circus transforms this obelisk into a new structure. Cumulative knowledge about the obelisk is established at public circus events, which include chariot races and competitions of life or death. Here, the obelisk absorbs these symbols and associations of victory and competition. Historian Regina Guy explains that the obelisk functions as a votive offering to the sun god, just as the chariots racing through the track are symbolic of the movement and progression of time and seasons, which is something only the gods can control. The Egyptian obelisk and other spolia work to establish Rome as a cultural epicenter of modernity while representing the victory and dominance of the emperor. Looking forward in 330 AD, Emperor Constantine takes a big risk and moves the empire's capital from Rome to Constantinople. To legitimize this choice, Constantinople must rival Rome and become superior in modern technology and public art. To do this, Constantine builds the Hippodrome, which is a new competitive gaming arena for Constantinople. 4 obelisks are erected at this new hippodrome and function primarily as a familiar image for Romans to recall the Circus Maximus, solidifying the hippodrome as an authentic circus while legitimizing Constantinople as the rightful capital of the empire. As Sarah Bassett describes, the obelisks created a vision of Rome for the circus viewers that was essential to Rome's image of power over the empire. As the obelisk undergoes these changes from an Egyptian dedicatory statue to circus object, the obelisks simultaneously change ideas about Egypt and its people in the eyes of the Romans. To the public, untranslated hieroglyphs categorize the obelisk and its Egyptian makers as other, which is essential to the Romanization of the object, as it solidifies Rome as a cultural center in the dominant civilization. In the end, the obelisk evolves and develops new roles in the campus marches and the circus while continuing Egyptian ideas of dominance and legitimization in both Egypt and Rome. Aside from these functions, the obelisk in Rome draws more associations with other important monuments such as the Art Pacis and the Mausoleum, which I explore in my extended essay. Thank you.
The next paper is by Nora Meeker, Spoliation in Ancient Rome, Intention and Interpretation, written for Dr. Mahoney's Art and Power in Pagan and Early Christian Rome.
Spoliation, broadly, is the reuse of architectural elements from one structure to be integrated on another. Use of spolia was popularized under Constantine's rule of the Roman Empire in the 4th century. A standard term to describe the process had not been developed until the first art historians of the 16th century. Spolia comes from the Latin word spolium, meaning spoils, particularly spoils of war, looting, or the skinning of animals for their hide. This definition carries a negative connotation of death and theft. However, use of spolia in ancient Rome can be seen to have been used with much more nuance than originally suggested. Giorgio Vasari, artist and writer from the Italian Renaissance, writes one of the first historical analyses of ancient Roman spoliation in his book, Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. The Renaissance is well known for its rebirth of the classical antiquity style. Vasari writes of his grievances with the ancients, specifically Constantine, who, in his eyes, destroyed the city of Rome with spoliation. He mourns the loss of ancient structures that could have been studied by his contemporaries. He sees the reuse as a symptom of the artistic decline he saw as the Roman Empire fell. It is no wonder that the men of this time would give the practice a name associated with war and looting, spolium. Scholarly opinion remained relatively negative for a long time after Vasari, until new interpretations came from several German art historians in the 20th century. Some, like Deichmann, continued to look into the more negative implications of spolia, especially the economic disparity of the late empire, while others, like Krautheimer and Esch, looked into this aesthetic development, cultural impact, and economic potential of spoliation. They wished to focus more on the new life that spolia gives, rather than the supposed death it results from. Modern researchers now look at spolia with a wide variety of lens as the topic becomes more researched. Archaeologists tend to focus more on the reused material as having been removed from antiquity and focus on its origin. Art historians tend to view it more as something received from antiquity, focusing more on its new context. Today, scholars aim to look back with their research and see what we can interpret about the ancient Romans from the structures studied. John Frey says one must recognize that in studying spolia, we are not examining objects as much as we are attempting to identify the less tangible and potentially much more informative evidence of an individual's interaction with them. The best way to interpret past intentions is by looking at primary sources, documents originating from the time being studied. The use of spolia is not written on much in antiquity, leading some scholars to believe the ancients were rather indifferent to the practice. However, the few we do have give interesting insights. One of the best primary sources we have is the Theodosian Code, a collection of Roman laws from 312 to 492. In it, we find several laws pertaining to the restriction of spoliation. However, their contempt isn't with the actual reuse of the objects, it's with the vandalization people would commit in order to get cheap building materials. The laws are made to conserve the traditional Roman cityscape and the civic pride that came with it. Laws forbid new building projects and prioritize the repair of standing ones. If a structure truly can't be saved, the spolia collected would be allocated out at the emperor's behest, most likely used for his own projects. After the empire's conversion to Christianity by Constantine, pagan structures became a topic of debate. Ultimately, the preservation of Rome and its beautiful craftsmanship led to pagan temples being protected, given that they cease pagan practices and remove all idols. Several Christian leaders of the time, like the poet Prudentius and St. Augustine, wrote of their support to reclaim the classical beauty for the Christians. Beyond interpretation, how was spolia actually used in Roman antiquity? Spolia was used for a wide variety of reasons, but for the most part, it can fit into three categories: ideological use, aesthetics, and utility, often falling in multiple or all three. All structures mentioned today are located in the heart of Rome, Italy. Constantine inherited Rome after his defeat of Maxentius in 312. Constantine believed the win was delivered to him by the Christian God, leading him to end religious persecution and start the conversion of the empire to Christianity. Because he was an outsider to the capital city, being born in what is now Serbia, and was making waves, being the first Christian emperor, he had to work on his public image. The Roman Senate dedicated a triumphal arch, a traditional celebratory monument, to Constantine for his win of the civil war against Maxentius. Constantine, who no doubt had plenty to say in the construction and design of his arch, made the bold move of taking reliefs from monuments dedicated to past emperors to use on its own. Scholars think the pieces could have come from stockpiles of material from dilapidated buildings, but it's likely that at least some were removed specifically to make up his arch. The spolia came from monuments to Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, 3 out of the 5 good emperors of Rome, whom all were beloved to the Roman public. He aimed to associate himself with them by choosing scenes that would not advertise him as a tyrant, but as a protector, balancing the enemy invaders, as all three had done before and as he did with Maxentius. This new amalgamation style was significant as it referenced the empire's past, but promised a different future, one that would surely come with Christianity. Romans, despite what the popularized modern image of stark white statues and columns would suggest, loved color. Spoliation was a new way to do this with the bold mix and matched use of spoliated columns and capitals of different shapes and colors. Constantine commissioned the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the first public church in Rome, in 324, and St. Peter's Basilica, what is now known as Old St. Peter's, in 360. In both structures, the new bold application of spolia was used. The columns lining the naves were of different colors and materials, and their capitals varied between orders. The layout wasn't completely random, as they had a matching column mirroring the other across the nave. Most scholars attribute this use as solely being aesthetic preference. Some, however, believe there is subtle Christian symbolism in the way the columns are placed, guiding the visitor to the altar and divinity. The style was so light that there are even examples of all new material being made to look spoliated, as seen in the Basilica of St. Paul. Constantine's reuse of architectural material had nothing to do with lack of funds, supplies, or skill. However, beginning in the late 4th century and onwards to the fall of the Roman Empire, it became a significant incentive. This is when we see the laws being made to detract from destroying old monuments for the sake of cheap material. The most common utilitarian practice of using spolia was seen in fortifications. For example, the Aurelian wall needed to be quickly built against the threat of the Gauls. Lots of reused materials served to make up the wall. 2nd century bricks are found, aqueduct stones were recut, and lots of pre-existing structures were incorporated in preference to new construction. As you can see, the use and intention of spolia is just as varied and ever-changing as the Roman Empire itself. No matter the opinion of ancients or scholars, its continued use of spolia has made it a defining feature of the Roman cityscape, one that beautifully blends modernity and antiquity. It perfectly illustrates the city of Rome's nickname, the Eternal City.
The next paper is by Anna Oberweis, Eastern Saints in Western Hands, the Frankish adoption of Byzantine warrior saints in text and image during the Crusades, written for Dr. Mahoney's Art of the Crusades, Crusades as Mediterranean Exchange.
The veneration of warrior saints is a long-standing tradition in Orthodox Christianity.
Despite Western European presence and even engagement in the rich history of warrior saints in Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean during the Crusades of the 11th and 12th centuries, the practice never gained traction in the West. This is perplexing considering the appearance of these figures in art and text of Crusaders whilst they inhabited the Eastern Mediterranean or Levant. As this presentation will demonstrate, the appropriation of Orthodox Christian warrior saints in Frankish art and text during the Crusades demonstrates a means to legitimize Western European claims to the Holy Land. That this tradition was not brought back to Western European, with a few exceptions, reflects the specific cultural, political, religious, and geographical contexts of the Eastern Mediterranean during this time. Christopher Walter defines the Byzantine warrior saints as a body of saints militarily fully equipped whose function was to defend Christian Byzantines against their enemies and who were regularly portrayed apotropaically in strategic places. The primary function of warrior saints, also known as military saints or soldier saints, was first and foremost protective. As their name implies, they were significant in the context of Byzantine warfare, often being called on before battle, and even documented as interceding on behalf of the Byzantines on numerous occasions to ensure their victory. Moreover, the majority of these warrior saints that the Crusader population or Franks became acquainted with are recorded as having had a military or military-related occupation during their terrestrial lives. Similarly, they were typically executed as a consequence of their public proclamation of their Christian faith or their refusal to serve a pagan god. Although these saints had been venerated previously, it wasn't until after the Orthodox Christian iconoclasm that warrior saints began to be recognized as a group of saints with common traits. Circle here from left to right, Saints Theodore the Recruit, Theodore the General, Mercurius, and Eustathios. The Franks' attraction to warrior saints stemmed from the eastern locality of the saints and their positions as combatants of evil, which could help them establish themselves as the rightful inheritors of the Holy Land. The warrior saints' origins in present-day Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Palestine were appealing due to their proximity to the land the Crusaders were intending to occupy, the birthplace of Christianity. Notions of the sanctity of space and place were earlier established in the 14th century when Roman Emperor Constantine publicly declared the legalization of Christianity in 313 in his Edict of Milan and called on his mother Helena to travel to the Levant to locate sites affiliated with the life and death of Christ. At these locations, Constantine funded the construction of churches. Gary Viken writes, "What had formerly been simply that region where the historical Jesus lived and died was becoming that special place in the world uniquely and continuously charged by virtue of Christ's former physical presence there with miracle-working sanctity." Viken adds that in conjunction with the emergence of the belief in locus sanctus, a relic tradition and the worshiping of holy men was also emerging. Essentially, place, objects, and people all had the potential to be deemed sacred, and it was close contact with them that the sacredness could be transferred. In sum, Constantine's initial actions introduced ideas of sacred place, which were continually affirmed in Christian worship through rituals of pilgrimage, relics, the production of icons, and the cult of saints. Before the Crusaders' arrival into Byzantium, oral and textual traditions documenting supernatural intercession in warfare had been well established in Greco-Roman and Christian contexts, with examples present in Homer's Iliad, the Bible, and later Byzantine accounts. Battles described in the book of Revelations, describing Michael the Archangel and a celestial army as intercessors in apocalyptic battles between good and evil, were especially influential on Byzantine and later Frankish narratives of divine interventions. An example of a later rendering is seen here. Scholars have observed the resemblance between Byzantine and Christian narrative and Crusader narratives, going as far as to say that the latter were likely based on the former. In particular, connections between Crusader narratives at the Battle of Antioch in 1098 and Anastasius's The Passions and Miracles of Demetrius. The Gesta Francorum's description of the moment of intercession in the Battle of Antioch reads, Then also appeared from the mountains a countless host of white men on horses, whose banners were all white. When our men saw this, they did not understand what was happening or who these men might be until they realized that this was the aid sent by Christ and that the leaders were St. George, St. Mercurius, and St. Demetrius. In Anastasius's text, the Greek city of Thessaloniki is close to being captured by barbarians when an army of angels on white horses, led by St. Demetrius holding a white cross, rushes out the city gates and chases the offenders off. In both examples, warrior saints are called upon to defend the city. The saints sit astride white horses and carry white standards as well. As the Gestaffryncorum's account and other similar ones demonstrate, by writing Eastern European saints into their accounts, the Franks were taking custody of them. The Crusaders then must be the rightful inheritors of the Holy Land because the warrior saints had nearly abandoned the Byzantines, who were also competing for the land, when they came to the aid of the Franks. The support provided by warrior saints proved that the Crusaders' occupation of Antioch, which would tilt the occupation of other major sites in the Crusaders' favor, was ordained by God. No. The Franks utilized art and imagery in the same manner. They commissioned local European artists to craft images of warrior saints on icons, amulets, and even decorate the walls of their churches. Many people of many religions, cultures, and backgrounds occupied the Levant when the Crusaders arrived. As these populations became acquainted with one another, they were greatly influenced by one another, and a blending of artistic and cultural styles and traditions emerged. Untangling artistic influences, tracing them to their origins, and verifying Frankish patronage is particularly precarious. However, there are a collection of mounted warrior saint icons that scholars have generally agreed to be of Frankish origin, including the two St. George icons pictured here with strikingly similar compositions. Considering the tumultuous climate of the Latin kingdom during the 13th century, the choice to depict St. George in this narrative is especially interesting. In the scene, St. George rescues a young boy from Mytilene after he is abducted by aggressors. Many scholars have associated the appearance of this scene with anxieties of oppression and power. This certainly makes sense given the Frank circumstances. Jerusalem had been captured by the Ayyubids in the late 12th century, recaptured briefly in the 13th century, and ultimately left the Ayyubids, Mongols, and Mamluks all vying for power. In a time of uncertainty, the Franks grasped at what little control they had left through the production of image, crafting scenarios in which they were victorious. Although the Byzantine Empire was no longer an immediate adversary, the Crusaders maintained their veneration of Eastern warrior saints as long as they occupied the land. While Saints Mercurius, Sergius, Bacchus, and the Theodores were left in the east, St. George is ultimately the exception. The Franks took a liking to him and brought him back to Europe with them, where he is still revered today. St. George's survival in the West speaks to his greatly admired universality, which his fellow warrior saints didn't have. The other saints had done their duty for the Franks in the Levant, but no longer had a use back west.
The next paper is by Zoe Hamilton, Mapping the Divine, Imagined Pilgrimage to Jerusalem During the Middle Ages, written for Dr. Mahoney's Art of the Crusades, Crusades as Mediterranean Exchange.
Jerusalem, a city touched by rulers and visitors from a variety of religious and cultural backgrounds, is a long-standing Christian pilgrimage site. During the 11th century, it was characterized by a phase of reinstated Western interest after the Crusader conquest of 1099. Crusaders moved across Europe, primarily along the Mediterranean coast towards Constantinople and through these cities here to reach Jerusalem. Due to the inaccessibility of participating in pilgrimage, a similarly long and laborious process, new avenues to satisfy the widespread desire became conventional forms of worship. Written accounts, relics, mementos, and other devotional aids emerged as forms to experience the Holy Land without actually traveling to the city. In contemporary discussion, the application of these tools beyond Jerusalem is described as the imagined pilgrimage. The Crusader period also marked a new phase in cartography concerned with distinguishing the heavenly Jerusalem from the earthly Jerusalem. While Christian traditions of mapping Jerusalem articulate the perception that the city occupies both earthly and heavenly forms, the imagined pilgrimage, through tools like Matthew Paris's itinerary in the Chronica Majora and the labyrinth pavements at Chartres Cathedral, prompt Christian pilgrims during the Middle Ages to express Jerusalem's duality. The maps of Matthew Paris, prefacing his mid-13th century manuscript, the Chronica Majora, exemplify how the imagined pilgrimage can be enacted through a physical devotional aid. As a monk at the St. Albans Benedictine Monastery in England, Paris's maps were employed by his monastic community in their existing efforts to reach the heavenly Jerusalem. Due to this focus on internal work, cloistered monks often saw pilgrimage to the real earthly city as a deterrence to their goals. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, a leader in the Reformation of the Benedictine order, articulates this sentiment. It is in the cloister that the monk comes to find the heavenly Jerusalem, the real goal of any and all pilgrimage, for the actual historic city was itself only an image, a figure of the future heavenly city. Paris's roadmap to Jerusalem departs from London rather than St. Albans and contains a range of paths lined with town names, directions, and travel days numbered between each stopping point. Near where southern Italy lies, extra pieces of vellum attached to the manuscript act as extensions of its standard pages. At this point, Paris welcomes the viewer to unfold the flaps outward or turn them over to personalize their imagined journeys in a reflection of distinct travel routes. With interactive flaps and no instructions, the design incorporates both the body and the mind through a system of open-ended prompts to imitate the map's movements and visualize the path depicted. This page represents the broader Holy Land, visually separated from the rest of the route through recognizable iconography. Port at Acre here is the main entry point for pilgrims, and then here is Jerusalem. Here is a detail of the city showing religious sites inside its characteristically emphasized walls. Labyrinth pavements decorating French cathedrals similarly invoke the imagined pilgrimage. While images of labyrinths were commonly depicted in contexts like manuscripts, the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral is believed to be the first large-scale public work of its kind. Constructed in France during the late 12th to 13th century, these labyrinths were consistently round, ranged from 20 to 45 feet wide, and contained crenellations around the outer edge. The center marks a symbolic arrival to Jerusalem. A plaque believed to have been a depiction of the city was attached to the blank spot in the center within the scallops until its removal in 1792. When prized access to Jerusalem was unable due to shifts in political occupation, users could imagine their pilgrimage from a distance as a substitute. The path width is the most significant aspect of the labyrinth constructions, as it is sized for a person to walk across. Unlike a maze, users can follow its universal path towards the center without the possibility of turning in the wrong direction. The narrow path forced orientation shifts and focused vision in the same way as Paris's map appendages. When users looked down at the receding pavement, they lost sight of their surroundings and withdrew from their sense of place in the church. The designs of Paris's map and the Chartres labyrinth reinforced their participatory nature through recognizable iconography of Jerusalem that was drawn from medieval maps of the city. During the 12th and 13th centuries, there was a boom in European map production. These maps, such as the Hague seen here, differ from contemporary maps through combining realistic representations with extra elements. Instead of portraying Jerusalem's geography and architecture as it appeared in real life, artists presented an overlapping history that included sites associated with biblical events. By combining reality and Christian tradition, artists articulated the Christian convergence of earthly and heavenly Jerusalem. The crenellations featured around the edge of Jerusalem, here in both Paris's map and outside the labyrinth, represent the city's walls as traditionally depicted in maps of the city at the time. Both the map and the labyrinth also contain specific references to the city's layout. The most prominent intersecting lines of the labyrinth represent two streets in Jerusalem, while Paris's map indicates sites of pilgrimage. Traditional map representations of the city also included streets and specific monuments as seen here in the Hague map. Both constructions of Jerusalem merely symbolize the holy site, but they elicit real responses, bridging the gap between the literal, the imagined, and the holy. Imagination becomes an integral piece to achieving enlightenment, while physical movement reaffirms the mind's journey. The Christian mapping genre of the Middle Ages informed users in its articulation of earthly and heavenly Jerusalem through recognizable iconography. This genre of mapping not only reveals the perception of Jerusalem's duality, but also how pilgrims would have derived value from an imagined journey that connected to the heavenly Jerusalem. Linked in their prompts for physical interaction and prolonged meditation, both Paris's maps and the Chartres labyrinth displace their user from time and space and uniquely invoke a performance of piety while redefining the role of locale during pilgrimage. Navigating a spiritual landscape beyond the Holy Land's borders, a process that may now read as cryptic and abstract, was a deeply symbolic and intentional practice.
I want to thank everyone in the first panel for that great set of papers. And now I'd like to invite the panelists up front to have a discussion with Jenna.
Beautiful presentations. Sorry, I'm a soft speaker. Can everyone hear me all right? Cool. I guess I'll just go through this quickly because I know we're on a time crunch, and maybe I'll go in order of presenter. Lily, your presentation on heart amulets. I was wondering, did the amulets ever change formally over time in the different kingdoms you were referencing, from this sort of like glass structure, or do they vary in size?
They're all, like a lot of other amulets at the time, about the size of a quarter. And that seems relatively consistent even outside of the periods I specifically looked at. The form itself is also relatively consistent because it seems like, I didn't look too far into this with my specific paper, but the simplicity of the form makes it an appealing object. And then its ties to the hieroglyph, and that you look at it and it's literally saying heart, also makes sense for it to align. So the form stayed relatively static. I think in the periods I was looking at, glass as a material became more prominent because glass as a material in Egypt in general arrived and became very prominent in that time period.
Really cool. And were you able to see the amulets at the Art Institute?
Yes, my original paper was because I was in the Egyptian collection and spotted the first image that was on my paper and was very captivated by the swirly blue lines of it, even though it's about this big.
Really cool. Christian, you spoke about the obelisk. I was wondering if the obelisk had the same sort of function in both Egypt and Rome and its importance to the sun. I'm wondering, was the solar cult as important in Rome as in Egypt? And did Augustus really admire, the sun and use it?
Yeah, so the obelisk in Rome still had this really important function of being a dedication to the sun god Sol. So when it was erected in the campus marshes, um, it was still this like super tall object reaching up towards the gods, or in this case, the sun god. And like I mentioned, it played the role of the gnomon in a sundial. So whenever the light shined on it, you saw the time of day. So like that like physical association with the sun god is super important. Um, and then not to mention the inscriptions on the bases of obelisks were also a dedication to the sun god Sol.
In both Egypt and Rome.
Yes, yeah.
Nora, hi. I was looking at the arc that you showed with all of the different spolia taken from 4 or 5 different sources. Three different sources. Was the arc mixed in with the different spolia meant to read as narrative? And was that difficult because it was taken from so many different sources and found in different sources?
Not necessarily. Compared to later spolia styles, which are very obvious in their kind of puzzle piecing of different colors, the Arch of Constantine was actually made pretty much to look like it could have been made at that time. He even recarved some of the faces of the past emperors to look like himself.
Oh, wow.
So it is kind of narrative, but it's not specifically like a timeline. It's more just like each one being a theme that he wanted to promote.
Great. Anna? Anna. I really liked your presentation. I was wondering, what was the starting point for your research? Which one of the warrior saints?
Yeah. I kind of encountered them as a group. There's a group of icons that are at St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai in Egypt that occurred on a lot of slides and in a lot of articles. And I kind of pieced together, the fact that, they were part of a similar group. So it didn't really start with like one saint. But yeah.
Okay. Any one experience? Have you seen depictions of them in person anywhere?
I don't know if in person.
Okay.
I think at first I kind of struggled with this class because I'm not religious and I felt like a very kind of barrier between me and the art. But as I got more into the research and it was more about the knowledge and it wasn't about necessarily religion as much, it got easier and it became so much more interesting.
Zoe, I really loved your presentation. Can you speak at all to the material of the maps that you were showing? Do a lot still exist? And I'm wondering, with the labyrinth that you showed that was on the ground, I saw you showed that image of people walking through it. I was wondering, because it fits that one person.
Yeah.
How were people exiting that and resolving their experience through the labyrinth?
I actually don't know how people were exiting, but since the photos show people, multiple people walking through that once, I would assume that they just
leave not according to the path once they reach the center. And then for the manuscripts, they were on vellum, and most of the images that I used were from the British Library, and I believe they're in the collection there, and they've digitized it, so.
Great. I hope that was just a warm up for all the other questions you're going to get from the audience when we break momentarily.
Thank you to Jenna and our first group of great panelists. As Jenna noted, it'd be great if you could ask individual questions of the presenters. We'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll have panel 2 and we'll fly into the 20th century. That part. I'll do it.
There can be no more important figure in American art history for the fight for photography as an art and for modern art in America than Alfred Stieglitz. Credited as the man who honed photography as a fine art, Stieglitz spearheaded what is known as the photo secession movement, which had the goal of quite literally seceding from traditional and amateur photography. In 1902, Stieglitz wrote a manifesto outlining the demands of the photo secessionists, demanding that photography be seen as a medium of individual expression that must shift away from the stagnant place it had found itself in. The success of this movement led Stieglitz to open a gallery in 1905 in New York City known as the Little Galleries of the Photo Secession, where he showcased photographers who understood his vision of a photography that was targeting formal qualities and self-expression. In addition to the gallery's space in New York, Stieglitz also published a magazine that reflected the ideologies of the photo secession movement and showed photographs from around the world, accompanied by essays and other writings that informed the work and those producing it. The magazine was entitled Camera Work and ran from 1903 to 1917, featuring photographs by artists from all around the world across 50 editions. Fed up with the conservative views of photography that Stieglitz had come to resent, this magazine was an elegant attempt at challenging the status quo and pushing for a better global understanding of the emerging, intriguing formal qualities of photography that had gone unrecognized until now. It is in the title of the publication itself that relays the message Stieglitz wished to share. Camera work implies that there is intention behind the photographer's decisions to bring forth the expressiveness of photography as a medium. In the naming process, and throughout the 50 issues, Stieglitz succeeded in his mission of changing the world's understanding of the medium. The scope of camera work began to branch out to include different types of writings and artistic mediums. Thus, Stieglitz's approach to dissemination of information and his ability to curate the bound page placed him in a very powerful position, one that was able to mold the tastes and outlooks of Americans and help them understand the changing art world. A main character in the contemporary discussion of the arrival of modern art to America, Stieglitz understood the changing discourse around modernism that was emerging in Europe. He had already laid the foundation for shifting the minds of the public. Given its mission driven by change, an impressive cast of contributors such as Edward Steichen and Gertrude Casimir, camera work captured the eyes of those wishing to understand the modernism that was occurring in photography, but now in painting and drawing as well. While the years 1903 to 1907 were devoted exclusively to photography, in 1908, camera work began to shift its emphasis as Stieglitz's relations with the photography community and longtime contributors began to sour, and his interest in showcasing European contemporary art increased. The journal had come to reflect these new priorities and an even balance between reproductions of photography and other art, which was represented with several pieces by the sculptor Auguste Rodin. In the following year, a special issue exclusively featuring the work of painters Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso. There are multiple examples of camera work issues that highlight these advancements in modernism as a whole, and I would like to touch on a few examples in order to strengthen my argument that Stieglitz's publishing and editorial savvy enabled a smoother transition to the acceptance of modernism in America. Stieglitz worked with other New York-based writers and artists in order to build upon these ideas expressed later in the run of the magazine. He included painters in the early editions as well, with articles by the frequent visitor to New York, James Henry Moser, who wrote an article for issue 6 entitled "A Painter's Impression of the Washington Exhibition." The article highlights an exhibition of photo secessionists in Washington, but ends with a clear indication. The article highlights an exhibition of photo secessionists in Washington, but ends with a clear indication that Moser and Stieglitz both knew the power painting had in the discussion of photography as a fine art. Although the focus of the magazine is photography, Moser uses language that compares it to painting. He says that now that this important exhibition in America of the work of the photo secession has passed into history, there lingers in the mind an impression rather of the camera's splendid possibilities, limitless as painting itself. Personal differences, unhappily, often are the rugged way of art workers, but it is that every man who penetrates a note further into the realm of beauty will find all his fellows receiving that achievement with sincere applause. This intersection of these two ideas show that Stieglitz saw how the popularity and understanding of photography and modernism were rising at nearly the same pace. He knew that there would have to be a conversation that included both in order to spread the word of the photo secession. Stieglitz carefully curated which essays and authors were included, almost as if the contents of the magazine were a foldable exhibition that one could carry in a book bag. He knew the power that print media had in the early 20th century and reached out to other well-established writers to be included in camera work as well. Sadakichi Hartman, a perceptive Japanese-American art critic who had started a publication of his own in 1893, wrote for the magazine in a number of issues in various genres, including exhibition critiques, short stories and scripts, and a general discussion of new ideas. In issue 6, he promotes intellectuality as a later point in the creative process, claiming that the whole process of creative activity, from the first outfleshing of the motive to the finished expression, is determined by imagination, emotion, and memory. And the latter is nothing but culture, knowledge, and accumulated experience. This may not seem like it's rooted in photography, but it so clearly is. He promotes the idea of photography as an intentional process that generates meaningful intellectual conversation that emanates from the image itself. This is just one of many such writings, Sadakichi Hartman. This is just one of many such Sadakichi Hartman writings in this issue about the expansion of knowledge as a natural order to the self-expression process. They all appear in different genres and are placed alongside photographs by Alvin Langdon Coburn. There's a clear intentionality of placing ideas about emotional and intellectual processes in a photography magazine. These ideas, the writing, and the work, the photographs, all fit together. There was an understanding of the artistic process that fueled both ideas of modernism and photography at the same time. The concepts explored in this issue are further reinforced in the 50th and ultimate edition of Camera Work, which prominently showcase the photographs of one of Stieglitz's young protégés. Paul Strand was a pioneering figure in modernist photography, and his work received enthusiastic recognition from Stieglitz. In fact, he dedicated the last issue to Strand's work, featuring 11 of his photographs. This gesture underscored Stieglitz's admiration for Strand's contribution to the modernist aesthetic in photography. In the same issue of Camera Work, Strand himself contributed an essay titled simply Photography, where he articulated his approach to modernist photography. Strand makes a clear point that there should be no distinction between medium for expression. He claims whether a watercolor is inferior to an oil, or whether a drawing, an etching, or a photograph is not important, as either is inconsequent. To have to despise something in order to respect something is a sign of impotence. Let us rather accept joyously and with gratitude everything through which the spirit of man seeks to an even fuller and more intense self-realization. This essay is often cited as providing a definitive explanation of the modernist aesthetic in photography, reflecting Strand's commitment to artistic expression through the medium. This final issue serves as a reminder that although Stieglitz's efforts had shifted from the photo-secession movement to a more general advocacy for modern art, that these two should be seen as one. Clearly, photography is part of the new spirit in art, and as Strand writes, it shares the same goals with modernist painting. For example, Strand's work is characterized by its emphasis on geometric forms, abstraction, and a focus on everyday subjects, reflecting the modernist photographer's rejection of sentimentalism and emphasis on capturing the essence of the modern world. Painter Marius Desire strove for these qualities in his own art. He was a longtime collaborator with Stieglitz, who included his work in Camera Work 3 issues prior. Desires aimed for bold experimentation and abstraction in painting, using geometric figures in order to capture the essence of objects. Similarly, Strand depicted the same sort of geometry in order to show the essence of the modern technological world through precise composition of manufactured shapes. Just issues apart, Stieglitz's inclusion of both artists' works in the pages of his magazines. Just issues apart, Stieglitz's inclusion of both artists' works in the pages of his magazines demonstrates his successful campaigns for the acceptance of modern-day art. Oh my gosh. Just issues apart, Stieglitz's inclusion of both artists' works in the pages of his magazine demonstrates his successful campaign for the acceptance of modern art by American audiences. It wouldn't have been possible had not Stieglitz so strategically curated both image and text, creatives and their work, in his enduring Camera Work magazine. Thank you.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
Sorry, I didn't see your text. I didn't
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Sorry.
No.
You killed it.
I was messing up a lot the first time.
You did
It
it.
was going to get rid of the screen was covering up so
Yeah, the text.
yeah, so
Our second speaker is Jocelyn Pedena Negrete and her paper Indigism and National Identity in Post-Revolutionary Mexican Art, a comparative analysis written for Dr. Cosentino's Mexican art class.
Good evening, everyone. Post-Mexican Revolution, Mexico faced significant social and economic disparities, with the bourgeoisie maintaining power and influence at the expense of the working class and indigenous populations. As a response to these inequalities, the concept of indigenismo emerged, advocating for the recognition and celebration of indigenous cultures and rights. This movement flourished from the 1930s through 40s, with muralists like Diego Rivera, José Clemente Orozco, and David Alfaro Siqueiros, also known as Los Tres Grandes, combining tributes to indigenous cultures with critiques of colonial oppression, creating a form of socialist romanticism. This paper explores the distinct interpretations of indigenismo by Los Tres Grandes in the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution. The manifesto of the Union of Technical Workers, Painters, and Sculptors, co-signed by Los Tres Grandes in 1924, serves as a starting point for their collective efforts. While the manifesto focused on artists' rights and conditions rather than specific artistic principle, it underscored the unity and collective action of these artists in advocating for social change through their art and activism. Rivera's mural, The History of Mexico, located in the National Palace in Mexico City, and completed between 1929 and 1935, spans the palace main staircase and walls. It represents Mexico's history from its pre-Columbian past through the Spanish conquest and the Mexican Revolution to Rivera's era. Vibrant colors differentiate between different time periods and themes, with rich blues and greens representing pre-Columbian societies, as seen in this side. Natural beauty, cultural richness, while stark reds and orange invoke the violence and upheaval of conquest and revolution. Dynamic scenes filled with movement guide the viewer through the significant events, balancing conflict and harmony to reflect Mexico's resilient nature. The juxtaposition of pre-Columbian civilizations with the Spanish conquest critiques colonial oppression and celebrates indigenous peoples' contribution to Mexico's identity. Rivera's portrayal integrates the revolution into a broader national narrative, advocating for justice, equality, and a unified national identity rooted in respect for Mexico's indigenous heritage, and a collective push towards social cohesive future. Orozco's mural Zapata expresses the revolutionary spirit and social struggles of Mexico. The painting portrays Emiliano Zapata, the iconic leader of the Mexican Revolution, surrounded by peasants, symbolizing the fight for agricultural reform and justice. Through vivid colors and composition, it captures the intensity of the revolution, with dark tones accentuating Zapata's menacing, bloodshot eyes, amidst of scene's bright surroundings. Orozco's nuanced portrayal avoids romanticization, presenting Zapata as a hero for liberty and land redistribution, yet also conveying an air of inhumanity and harsh leadership. The juxtaposition of Zapata's imposing figure with obscured faces suggests a collective reluctance to confront the tragedies of the revolution, emphasizing the senseless violence and profound sacrifices that were endured by its victims. Siqueiros' child mother.
based on a photograph by Hugo Brim, employs modern materials like pyroxylin for vibrant, chaotic colors alongside sharp contrast and dynamic lines. This technique underscores the urgency and burdens of youth in a painting that captures the interaction between a child and an infant. Siqueiros portrays a child with a half smile and an anxious expression, conveying a loss of innocence and serving as a direct challenge to viewers. His depiction of indigenous subjects carries a sense of urgency and activism, underlying his conviction that art is a pivotal tool for political engagement and societal transformation. Child Mother stands as a profound example of Siqueiros' approach to indigenismo, not just a cultural or historical depiction, but as a forceful critique of the social injustices he believed art should confront and challenge. In conclusion, the representations of indigenismo in Rivera's History of Mexico, Orozco's Zapatas, and Siqueiros' Child Mother offer varied perspective on Mexico's indigenous heritage and its role in shaping national identity. Rivera celebrates indigenous civilizations' resilience, while Orozco portrays Zapata's connection to the indigenous peasantry and their struggles for justice. Siqueiro presents a more intimate depiction, emphasizing maternal bonds amidst urban poverty. Through their works, these artists contribute to a nuanced understanding of indigenismo's significance in confronting historical injustices and shaping national identity. Thank you.
Our third speaker is Rachel Stern, who will present her paper, Alice Rome, Transcending the Canvas, written for Dr. Gardner Huggett's Art from 1945 to 1975.
The French artist Alice Rahan emerged as a poet in 1930s Paris, writing in a fantastical surrealist style. Upon her move to Mexico City from Paris in 1939 to escape the imminent threat of World War II, she transitioned from poetry to painting. She imbued her paintings with ancient techniques, rituals, and the mystic as she searched for a primordial, ancient version of herself. Rahan's ceremonious practice is rooted in her search for identity, age-old ritual, and spiritualism, serving as a transcendent escape. She drew inspiration from and collaborated with prominent artists including Max Ernst, Juan Miró, and Pablo Picasso, all while experimenting with her own expressive style. Studying a broad source of ancient art forms, Rahan incorporated ritualistic elements into her craft. This paper situates Rahan as an expatriate, intrigued with the spiritual, grappling with the modern age, and searching for identity amidst a new culture. To Rahan, the act of making was as significant as the painting itself. In her 1948 work, Self-Portrait and Autobiography, Rahan creates a captivating primordial landscape of artificial and organic materials. She captures the essence of herself, her moment, and her place, moving through her journey to Mexico. To make this work, Rahan painted a layer of earth tone colors onto canvas. Once dried, Rahan layered sand and volcanic ash on top. Pieces of sand glisten in the light like stalagmites in the ancient caves Rahan was so moved by. She then scratched into the wet mixture, revealing various colors of paint underneath. Rahan's experience as a poet culminates in her expressive narrative structure. It is a story, and the continuous mark serves as a timeline. The staircase leads the viewer's eyes up, taking them through multiple versions of Rahan through time. She immerses herself in the palette of North and South American landscapes she encountered on her travels, local Mexican soil, and volcanic remains from Earth's core. Through her choice of material and technique, she connects with the land and spiritual realm, evading her present exiled reality. In a span of only 3 years, Rahan's style of self-portraiture evolved. Her 1951 self-portrait is stylistically different demonstrating her emotional development and changing self-perception. Instead of being surrounded by Mexican aesthetics, she incorporates them into her very being. She merges the cosmic and rich landscape she encountered, building a symbolic portrait of her memories and dreams. Through psychic autonomism, surrealist artists dictated their dreams without conscious thought, thus revealing their psychological landscape. They sought to capture experiences that cannot be expressed through verbal or written language or seen in nature. The sensory experience of painting served as an emotional release, a crucial aspect for an artist generation emerging between two world wars. For these surrealist artists, the self was a performance. Rahan once wrote, "A woman who was beautiful one day took off her face, thus contrasting the inner and outer selves." She drew inspiration for her own performance from Yup'ik masks, yet another age-old art form she encountered on her travels throughout the Americas. Used in a variety of indigenous rituals, including hunting, feasting, and dancing, these masks were believed to be imbued with spiritual powers which Rahan summons on her canvas. While in Mexico, Rahan initially struggled to connect with the new culture. By incorporating age-old ritual into her practice, she kept ancient traditions alive. She sought to connect with ancient peoples by replicating their actions, through feeling the same sensations and touching the same earth. She also integrated elements of traditional Mexican clothing into her wardrobe. This incorporated her ritual into the everyday and served as an extension of her creative process. Additionally, she sought to connect to a time without modern technology. Rahan's art instead focuses on the natural world. In a period overwhelmed by reports of war, advertisements, and mass media, Rahan transports back in time to an era when the image was a rarity. Rahan studied a variety of cultural traditions ranging from India, Spain, and the Americas. On Rahan's travels to India in the 1930s, she was inspired by Hindu spirituality. While on a 1933 visit to the caves of Altamira in Spain, Rahan's interest in ancient art peaked. Painted over 30,000 years before Rahan, she connected with the prehistoric age. Rahan responded to ancient cave painting by stating, "In earliest time, painting was magical. It was key to the invisible. In those days, the value of a work lay in its powers of conjuration." Inspiration from her travels culminated in her painting. Rahan drew from ancient petroglyphs, cave paintings, and codices, evident in her stylistic choices. In self-portrait and autobiography, for example, Rahan molded an earthen surface to carve her own version of petroglyphs onto. A volcanic eruption in Paracutin, Mexico in 1943 garnered the attention of Rahan and her contemporaries. Incorporating volcanic ash onto the canvas, she harnesses its natural powers, creating a witch-like potion. Her use of organic materials and ancient techniques defy conventional definitions of painting. The Hindu belief in pantheism, for example, the belief that everything contains a soul, is reflected in Rahan's choice of organic materials. Rahan, like other surrealists, worked under the belief that artists can convey laws of nature not seen by science. In her poetry, she transforms herself into animals, spiritual entities, and goddesses, and links a painter's ability to create with that of a magician. Her work is a testament to the power of the unseen, with creating to reveal the subconscious. Bringing together a variety of ancient traditions, Rahan went beyond boundaries of the subconscious. Utilizing unique mediums and techniques allowed her to transcend time and space, connecting with the mystical and ultimately herself. After World War II, Rahan became a naturalized citizen of Mexico, living there until her death in 1987. She continually created personal works, imbuing her creations with the atmosphere of her surroundings. Rahan's search for connection upon entering a new landscape results in a compelling ritual practice, one that was incorporated into her very being. As she once said, the shaman, the sibyl, and the wizard, the painter had to make himself humble so that he could share in the manifestation of spirits and forms.
Our fourth speaker is Zoe Cameron O'Shea with paper Transcending Muses, The Surrealism of Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo, written for Dr. Cosentino's Mexican art course.
British artist Leonora Carrington and Spanish artist Remedios Varo formed a close friendship and artistic partnership after emigrating to Mexico City as political exiles in the early 1940s. While living in Mexico City, Carrington and Varo departed from the limitations female artists experienced in the Parisian Surrealist circle, which reduced female artists to being the muses of their male romantic partners. Carrington and Varo found inspiration in mythology, mysticism, and magic, which they considered to be an inherently feminine practice and one that they practiced together during their daily visits to each other's homes. Through their exploration of esoteric subject matter in their personal lives and their artwork, Carrington and Varo formed a style of surrealism distinct from that of their male surrealist predecessors. Carrington and Varo first crossed paths in Paris when their respective romantic partners, artist Max Ernst and poet Benjamin Perret, introduced them to their Parisian surrealist circle, led by André Breton. According to André Breton, the ideal surrealist woman was not an artist, but rather a femme enfant. Translating to woman-child in French, a femme enfant was a young woman whose spontaneous innocence, uncorrupted by logic or reason, brought her into closer contact with the intuitive realm of the unconscious, so crucial to surrealism. The femme enfant functioned as a muse to the male surrealist artist. Leonora Carrington was introduced to Breton's inner circle of surrealists at 19 years old when she entered a romantic relationship with Max Ernst, who was 27 years her senior. Although Carrington had earned recognition as an artist in Paris, having exhibited 2 paintings at the 1937 International Surrealist Exhibition, the age difference between her and Ernst caused her to be perceived as his femme enfant. Carrington was naturally frustrated by this, admitting, "I never considered myself a femme enfant like André Breton wanted to see women. Nor did I want to be understood by this, nor did I try to change the rest." Remedios Varo, although older than Carrington and only slightly under a decade younger than her husband, expressed her discomfort as a younger woman in the Parisian surrealist circle, stating that "I was not old enough, nor did I have the aplomb to face up to them, to a Paul Eluard, a Benjamin Perret, or an André Breton." André Breton indirectly influenced Carrington and Varo's relocation to Mexico, having established a relationship between the surrealists and the country after visiting it in 1928 and idealizing it as the surrealist place for excellence. However, the circumstances surrounding Carrington and Varo's move to Mexico were less than ideal. After Max Ernst was arrested by the Gestapo for what the Nazis infamously denounced as degenerate art, Leonora Carrington fled to Spain, where she experienced a mental breakdown from her anxiety and was hospitalized in a psychiatric institution. Before her parents admitted her to a second institution in South Africa, Carrington escaped to Portugal, where she met and quickly married Renato Leduc, a Mexican diplomat and poet. After moving to the United States and living in New York City for a year, the couple relocated to Mexico in 1942 and ended their marriage in 1943. In 1940, Remedios Varo was in prison in Paris because of her marriage to Benjamin Perret, who was subjected to political persecution due to his association with the Communist Party. The two were freed and fled Europe shortly before the Nazi occupation of France, initially relocating to Venezuela before finding refuge in Mexico, where they were welcomed by the government because of their Spanish ancestry. After meeting again in Mexico in 1943, Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo, along with Hungarian photographer Kati Horna, formed a close community in the Colonia Roma neighborhood of Mexico City. The 3 artists regularly met at each other's kitchen tables to discuss their lives, as well as religion, mythology, magic, and art. Carrington and Varo would share recipes for potions that they would invent and prepare together in the kitchen with ingredients purchased from Mexico City's Sonora Market and the city's traveling herb salesman. The 2 artists, both enthusiastic readers, would discuss their literary influences, with Varo interested in the writings of Armenian mystic George Gurdjieff, theosophy, and science fiction, and Carrington deeply reconnecting with the Celtic mythology that her Irish maternal grandmother had introduced her to as a child. Despite, or perhaps because of the expectation that women in the surrealist movement be naive, the pursuit of esoteric knowledge empowered Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo as artists. Carrington's belief in the relationship between female empowerment and esotericism is made explicit in a letter to surrealist patron Edward James, where she wrote, "Most of us, I hope, are now aware that women should not have to demand rights. The rights were there from the beginning, they must be taken back again, including the mysteries which were ours and which were violated, stolen, or destroyed." Carrington and Barrow, having experienced misplacement during their childhood as rebellious Catholic boarding school students, in addition to the devastating institutionalization and imprisonment they experienced in their adulthood, regarded their domestic spaces in Mexico City as sanctuaries. It is worth mentioning that because they had relocated to Mexico, they were free to object to the restrictive expectations of their European families, which likely would have prevented them from experiencing domesticity as liberating. This sense of liberation was also due to the advantages that they experienced as upper-class European women in Mexico. Carrington and Barrow's paintings often depict domestic spaces as magical environments, including Carrington's 1955 painting, The Chair, Dagda Tua de Danann. Tua de Danann refers to the magical race of underground people in Celtic mythology that Carrington's grandmother had claimed their family had descended from, as illustrated in this painting by Scottish symbolist John Duncan. Carrington's painting depicts Dagda, the king of the Tua de Danann. His body is the black and white throne that he looks down upon, engraved with his name and various symbols, including suns, stars, and flowers. On the round table beside him, there is a large white egg with a rose rising out of it, representing the egg of creation. The egg of creation is a significant occult symbol, representing an alchemical vessel for regeneration and rebirth, and one which Carrington and other female surrealists frequently used in their work. The anthropomorphic furniture in the chair was also a repeating motif in the work of Leonora Carrington, and one that Remedios Vero borrowed in her 1960 painting, Mimicry, which depicts a female figure who has been sitting for such an extended period of time that her body has become one with the chair she is seated in. As the title describes, her skin is patterned to mimic the upholstery of the chair, her hands and feet have become its gilded armrests and wooden legs. While the painting depicts the magical properties of domestic spaces, it also illustrates a woman's immobility within them. The recurring combination of domestic and esoteric themes in the artwork of Leonora Carrington and Remedios Vero demonstrates how they regarded their neighboring homes in Mexico City as sanctuaries, which allowed them to uncover their own sources of inspiration and define their own identities as artists, transcending beyond the limitations set by the previous generation of surrealists in Paris.
Our final speaker this evening is Eli Schmidt, who will present their paper, Beyond the Realms, Henry Darger and Chicago Visual Culture, written for Dr. Mark Polad's Chicago Art History course.
How much water left? Hello. Thanks for sitting with us all tonight. Yeah, I'll start. 5 blocks from here, in a tiny second floor apartment, some of the most radical work of the 20th century was made. The walls were painted black, and pictures were painted all over the wall. Probably smelled of glue and old, wet paper. Henry Darger lived here for 43 years. That's him right there, one of the only known pictures of him. He worked right over at the hospital on Fullerton and Sheffield as a janitor, and he attended the DePaul chapel right on Webster almost every day. He was a writer and an artist and also an amateur meteorologist, and he spent all of his time working, and he created some of the most magical works anyone has ever seen. It is by examining his work within the larger context of Chicago artist that instead of solely as him as an outsider artist, that we can begin to understand the ways in which the myths of the outsider artist can limit the academic potential of his work. Darger's visual work acts as a backdrop to his novel, which was called The Story of the Vivian Girls, and which is known as the realms of the unreal, of the Glando-Angelinian war storm caused by the child slave rebellion. It's a 15,000 word novel, and most of it is insane. It's the longest novel in the English language, which is a feat that I find extraordinary. He was revolutionary in his reuse of popular images drawn from discarded newspapers and magazines Darger would trace and copy the images of these little girls and place them within his compositions. And he created these really large works. These are only fragments here, but probably spanning about 20 to 100 inches, 20 by 100 inches across on these pieces of paper attached by glue and tape. And they all depict scenes from his novel. This is a work, undated, we don't really know when he made any of his works, called 145 at Jenny Ritchie, Hard Pressed and Harassed by the Storm. And the composition is very lively. It's a room full of these little girls, they're playing, and there's these characters, I think, how do I word this? These are called blengens. They're mythical protectors of children. They begin the story as very definitive, and you can really tell who they are, but as his works go on, they become more and more like every child. But we can really see, because Darger left everything when he died, and he really never threw away anything, we can really go and trace back to where his work really came from. You can see in these coloring pages, the wings that appear on the blengens, the horns that appear on the blengens, more wings from all these syrup ads, and it's hard not to look at these and really wonder what is going on with these nude children. It occupies such a hard place in his work when you're talking about it, and much ink has been spent on analyzing his psychology. He's been called a serial killer in waiting. He's been called a hurt man and a hermit, a homosexual and a genius. But most all monographs really focus on his total isolation. They show him as a man unstuck in time, totally out of touch with the current arts and the cultures of the world. And academics have continued to portray him as an artist solely motivated by his desires, in a way that really strips him of his artistic intent, a myth that has been built up by years of institutions and audiences. And it's a common story in the art history world, this search for uniqueness that we all are attracted to, and this uniqueness that we slowly eliminate the nuance of these artists by propagating stories about them. And the first exhibition of his work was really when this myth began. It was staged in 1977 at the Hyde Park Art Center, right here on the south side of Chicago. It was mounted by Nathan Lerner, who was Henry Darger's landlord at the time. He was a photographer of his own. This is one of his works. They're wonderful. We have some up. We just had some up at DePaul, I believe. But he was an artist and he was a professor. And when he came into Darger's room after he died, after Darger had expressed, "Please throw away all of my work," he found all of this and decided that he needed to take it into his own hands to show the world this artwork. And in the pamphlet for the exhibition, he describes Darger as a shuffling old man, a recluse, who'd never had a visitor except for a rare visit from a priest. And it's interesting to see how the myth began as soon as Darger died, but how could it not? Nathan Lerner speaks of Darger's life and art as inseparable. The world of these stories was his life, and he was a recluse, truly, and spent most of his time alone. But where the myth becomes real is the lack of his connection to a greater art world. The popular discourse of his paintings paints him as mentally insane, and his writings are believed to be unintelligible, when they're anything but. I really love this one excerpt of his work where he's kind of in the realms of the unreal. Darger is talking about the scene right before a war or a battle happens, and he writes, "The whole surface of the sky seems agated in the glowing tumultuous convulsions, and the red darkness was seemingly more supernatural and fearful than words could say." And it's hard to strike me not that these are the words of a modernist and not a man totally on his own. And he was very culturally literate. He read Cervantes and Baum, and read and devoured the popular traditions. And I find it really interesting to think about his work in context with larger Chicago artist movements at the time, and especially the Harry Who were mainly a young movement of artists working in Chicago in and around the School of the Arts of Chicago and the Hyde Park Art Center around the 1960s. Their art was really brightly rendered, it was rich, and it really drew from the absurdity of comics and popular media. And they believed by using these low art sources that they could create new and exciting high art. And looking at both of these works, it's really hard not to see some of the very stylistic similarities between Darger's work and these two artists' works. This is Jim Nutt's work, Somersault, and this is Rei Yoshida, Untitled. Rei Yoshida was the professor that taught most of the Harry Hu and the Chicago Imagist. And I think it's really interesting to see the ways that Yoshida has really taken in these low art sources, but also frame them in a very almost high art way in these white boxes. And it's interesting to look at Jim Nutt's work and see the use of just a phallus here and all the blood. It's a very violent image. And unlike both these artists, excuse me, I need some water. But unlike both of these artists, Darger his work wasn't a reaction to any movement. He was not interested in violence for its shock factor or its philosophical implications. He lived a life of violence. He was an abused and forgotten man that spent most of his time as a child in a workhouse where they sent him there because his heart wasn't in the right place, according to the doctor. He was a worker paved into the streets, and he used the materials around him to create timeless work. The Harry Hu could only wish that their work could become as pure as Darger's. They were obsessed with the art brut writings of Jean Dubuffet, and the images wished to possess this raw power of purity in their work. And it's really rare that we find an outsider artist as internationally renowned as Darger, who we know so little about. We only know what he wanted us to know. His entire world was in that small Lincoln Park apartment. And many have tried to define Darger, and I will make no attempts to do so. He is seen as the face of outsider art, the most idiosyncratic and isolated of them all. Dubuffet writes of outsider art. He defines outsider art as work executed by people untouched by artistic culture, works in which imitation has little to no part. It's hard not to see these words ring on deaf ears. Darger, who drew from a language that itself was drawing from thousands of years of Western art and literature. He was not, nor is any creator of art, a participant in Plato's cave. Darger's work reflects an intelligence of line, shape, color, and form. It's intelligent, and I think there's so much more to it than just an insane man. It's like an intelligence that in some ways is way more effective, I believe, and mature than that of the Harry Hu or any of the Imagist. His work is as groundbreaking and exciting as it was in 1973 when Kyoko and Nathan Lerner stepped into his apartment for the first time, and they stood in astonishment as the world unfolded before them. Thank you. Should I just stay up here? Yeah, I guess you can. I'll just stay up here.
Well, we started in Egypt and we're back in Lincoln Park. And I want to thank everybody for the second panel for another great set of papers. And I'd like to invite the panelists to come up and Jenna to have a conversation.
Again, beautiful presentations. I'll go in order just like I did last time, starting with Spencer. I was reading your paper and you mentioned a lot about the 291 publication. And you spoke a lot in your presentation about Stieglitz's writing and educational focus. I was wondering if you think that Stieglitz ever got to a point in his work where he felt that American artists were living up to their European counterparts.
Yeah, I definitely do think that Stieglitz found, first of all, he found success with the photosecession movement, ending camera work as a whole. And then, like you said, I talked about the 291 publication. And basically, this publication sprung from the same gallery under a different name with different focuses. So I think that whenever he started the 291 publication, there were artists that had already come over from Europe and had been working with him and had shown their work at like the Armory show and in other galleries in New York and Boston. But I think that by the end of the 291 publication, that there was a newfound proudness that he had for like American modernists. So definitely, I think that there's at least a recognition that people were more willing to understand it. Yeah. Thank you.
Jocelyn? Great presentation. I really am interested in mural painting and its histories both in the Americas and Europe. What were the main factors of why so many artists, especially following the Mexican Revolution, favored mural painting as a medium?
It was a way to express what was going on post-revolution for people, for the population, and specifically indigenous population that didn't have access to certain mediums to know about the news. So it was a good way for everyone to have access at these political art statements. Therefore, everyone had access to look at it, to see what was going on, and to be able to see how they're being represented.
Yeah, you showed images of the National Palace in Mexico, and it seemed huge. And you're walking up the staircase as you're trying to read it. I'm wondering, like how legible do you feel like it is in person, and the audiences that would have seen it inside the palace at the time?
So even finding pictures for the whole mural, it was very difficult because it's so enormous. Therefore, I think that if you were to go in person to the palace and to look at the mural, you can definitely have many visits because you're not going to take in everything that you see all at once. And what was the
Who were the audiences? It's just open to the general public and people can go in and see it.
yes.
Rachel, I was really interested in the use of organic material in the canvas, like you were explaining. In your research, did you ever discover additional materials that Rayon used aside from the ash and sand that you mentioned?
Yeah, actually with the Yaptic masks, I found one later in my research that she was also a sculptor and worked in a lot of mediums later in her career. So at one point she made her own three-dimensional sculpture of a mask using things, I believe it's like sticks and just random stuff that she found in the landscape.
Okay. You think it was like randomly collected by her, or like the sand and ash she's using is taken from specific geographies and areas?
It's very specific to the site. I mean, all of her materials come from Mexico, which she was trying to integrate into. Yeah, I think it was very intentional.
Zoe? It's interesting that Carrington and Varro lived such spectacular lives. Now it seems easier to be a woman artist and to have your work accepted. What are the ways in which they were able to make their work well known? Was it just their proximity to the other male contemporary surrealist artists, or were they involved in other things that accelerated their path to popularity?
It's a good question. They definitely, that involvement with their romantic partners who were so ingrained in this like circle certainly helped. But even before they became introduced to them. Carrington had exhibited a surrealist self-portrait at a national exhibit of surrealists, so she had earned recognition in her own right without the help of Max Ernst. And then Barrow as well was independent in her achievements. While she was working in Paris, she did not practice art as much as she did after her move to Mexico, so that she was very independent in that sense.
Okay, great. And Eli, very cool overview of the work of Henry Darger. I would love to hear more on your opinions of handling the work of an artist who's no longer here. Since you mentioned Nathan Lerner, is it? And as I understand, Darger left no will behind.
Yeah, there's conflicting accounts onto what the proper thing to do in that case was. Because even within his book, he talks about how he wants it to be published at some point. But right before his death, when the learners asked him what to do with all of this kind of matter, just the things in his apartment, because I don't know if they understood what really was up there, he told them to get rid of it all. So there's kind of this conflicting feeling of what to really do with any of that work. And I think it's interesting to think about what any of us would do in that situation as well. Once that treasure trove had been discovered, would any of us get rid of it? And I mean, it's also the question of how people, especially landlords, like exploit the people that they are living within their spaces. That it's just kind of a continual exploitation of his life and his work. That these people that were able to own a building and have that space continue to be able to profit off it. But there were never any people that came forward until pretty recently that's a very distant relative to gain the financial control over Darger's work. And then there's always the question that the learners really have done a lot of work to get the popular view of Darger's work into the public. It's not an easy answer.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know what you would have chosen? If you were
I think that the most responsible thing would be not to destroy it, because it's really beautiful and important work, I believe. But try to limit the amount of exploitation and financial gain that would be received from that by either donating it to a museum that could properly care for it, or setting up a fund so that the work could be seen by everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for a really great set of presentations and evening. And I'd like to invite our chair, Mark Delancey, to come and hand out the awards.
Big stack of awards. I get the honor and privilege of awarding our Outstanding Alum Award, recognizing an award that recognizes those who've made us particularly proud in their endeavors after leaving our program. And tonight's recipient is Jenna Washington, who I had the pleasure of teaching African art not so very long ago, in lots of courses actually. We greatly appreciate her returning to share her expertise gained since graduating with our students. So it gives me great pleasure to present Jenna with this award. And I also get to award essay prizes. So the department has annual essay prizes, several of them. We have a prize for the best paper submitted from the capstone course, as well as papers at the 200 level and the 300 level that were written for other courses other than the capstone. So for the capstone course, the prize is awarded to Spencer Bolden. You've seen the presentation that goes along with the paper for which. For the 200 level non-capstone paper prize is awarded to Amanda De Leon, Remedios Faro, Searching for Meaning, written for Dr. Cosentino's 248 Mexican Art History. We'll have to give her that later, I guess. And for the 300 level non-capstone prize, that is awarded to Alex Riccio for Damnatio Memoriae and the reuse of artwork from tyrannical emperors, written for Dr. Mahoney's Ha 320 Art and Power in Pagan and Early Christian. And I want to thank our symposium committee for reading all of the submitted papers and coming to those decisions. Joanna Gardner-Huggett, Yun-Shan Liu, and Cheryl Bashan. And finally, I'm happy to present certificates to our presenters this evening. But before I do so, I have many people to thank for tonight's event. A great deal of work went into making this symposium happen. And I'd like to recognize a few of those responsible. First and foremost, Professor Joanna Gardner-Huggett. Who deserves recognition for teaching our capstone course, beautifully preparing our students for their presentation this evening. We have a little thank you card. Your own award. So Professor Gardner-Huggett, along with Professor Liu and Professor Bashan, deserve an extra big thank you tonight for planning the symposium itself, a task made additionally difficult this year in the unfortunate absence of our usual support staff. So they had nobody helping them, arrange things, order things, put things in. They did it themselves, especially Joanne. And of course, I'd like to also thank the professors who guided our students, as Joanna said at the outset, guided our students as they refined their papers in the capstone course, as well all who woke up extra early, and I feel your pain, to spend time giving feedback to our students as they practice their presentations. So thank you to them. And finally, of course, I'd like to thank all the parents who sent us these brilliant students. I think I can speak for the whole department when I say we feel lucky to have the opportunity to work with them. We appreciate your support. So let me hand out some awards. So first I have Spencer Boulding. And Christian Braun. And Jocelyn Cadena-Negrete. Zoe Hamilton. Got little pink stickies everywhere here. Lily Horner. Nora Mika. Anna Overwasser. Zoe Reusch. Eli Schmidt. And last but not least, Rachel Stone. That concludes our evening. Congrats to all of you for the sort of marathon of capstone course and getting through and presenting a wonderful symposium. And now, if you would like to join us upstairs on the 4th floor, we have all kinds of yummy things to eat and drink as we congratulate our participants.
What's it? Sari. S-E-R-I. Sari. Congratulations. That was lovely.
No worries.
Yeah, it's important.
Maybe can we take a picture of everybody? Join Do you guys want to come toward the center here, or maybe stand right in front? Like everyone so it was just coincidence. I